this lecture we are organizing in English, in line with our aspirations to speak and learn different languages and to promote different languages in this intercultural dialogue that we have during this school. Thank you for being with us, and it's a great pleasure for me and for the whole team to host for the second time our next lecture, Nikolina Židek from Croatia. Hello, Nikolina, welcome. For the second time in our school. You gave last time a lecture on dealing with the past in Argentina and Spain. And it was a great one. It was like a warm-up for our summer school 2019. Mm-hmm. This year we will continue the dialogue on the same, more or less the same topic or similar. We're going to talk about a new actor in the Argentine quest for truth, memory, and justice. Please, could you all turn off your microphones? Thank you very much. So, of course, you are all invited to give your comments and impressions as we did in the last 3 days in chat. And after the lecture, we will include you. We will invite you to maybe speak in direct and to talk with Nikolina with your questions. Okay, I will now speak about Nikolina as a formal part. So Nikolina is adjunct professor at IE School of Global and Public Affairs and a member of a research group Places, Marks and Territories of Memory at the Memory Studies Nucleus Institute for Economic and Social Development in Argentina, Buenos Aires. She holds a PhD in political science from the Complutense University in Madrid. She lives, well, in the triangle, Croatia or Zagreb, Madrid, and Buenos Aires. And her areas of expertise are memory studies, memory politics, transnational justice, and human rights. So really something very interesting for all of us. In America Latina, in Latin America, and here in our region, this part of Europe, ex-Yugoslavia, as you wish. So this was a formal part. Again, I would like to use this opportunity to share some private impressions. So you really have a great opportunity to meet incredible women with spirit and strength, which are not very often in people, who love life, but also she loves her research work, which is very important. We could see that in the last lecture of Ilinka. So she was great because she was in love with her team, with her topic. So after Teresa yesterday, after Ilinka 1 hour ago, again, we have another lady who passionately fights for critical thinking, for freedom of thought, and she also trying to help in keeping memories on private level, but on global as well. And I am very grateful to Branko Anđić, our friend and translator and writer, who made it possible to meet you 1 year ago. And I'm sure he did it on purpose. And it was one of his magic. Nikolina, thank you very much for being with us, and please, microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, Jelena, for everything in general and for inviting me. It is an honor to participate in this International Summer School. And yes, it is also an honor to interact and exchange things with you, with this group of passionate people, well, passionate women, as we could see mostly. And yes, I'm also very grateful to Branko and to Ljiljana, especially, who is not with us anymore, that they also introduced me to you. So yes, I'm pretty passionate about the memory politics in general in the former Yugoslavia, and also in Argentina, since I live in Argentina. And yes, this is like a continuation of what I already talked about in last year in Belgrade, but I would like to expand a little bit more in Argentina, because I think that this is a very important process, that it will also make us think a little bit about things that can be done at the personal and at the political level, because personal level is often political level, but we don't see it as such. So today I will talk about I will speak in English, but I will mix a bit of Spanish. I will, when I talk about certain concepts, because I like the sound of it better in Spanish. In general, everything sounds better in Spanish. I will talk about disobedient stories with spelling errors, which is a new actor in the Argentine quest for truth, memory, and justice. But I should not think that you all know what happened in Argentina just because you speak Spanish or interested in that. So by way of a pretty long introduction, I will give you the whole historical context of what happened in Argentina, so that you can know and get introduced to the complexity of the issue, and also then to get to know this new actor, which is for me a very important one, because it is a big novelty at the global level. This is something that we haven't seen before, because we're talking about the children of the genocide perpetrators who are standing up against what their parents did, but as a group. We have seen examples of that at an individual level, especially of children of Nazis, but we have never seen that this can be a group, an association of people who have gone through the same not the same, but similar things, and who also feel the need to join the struggle for truth, memory, and justice, and especially for justice, and we will see why. And we can imagine that it was a very difficult process for them to assume this new role, because they also have to overcome certain obstacles, not only at the social level, but also at the family level, and also at the personal level, which is a very strong process. So by way of introduction, we know that in the 20th century, Argentina had a pretty complex history, and that since 1930 until 1976 or 1983, it had 6 coups, and between the coups and in between the military dictatorships, it had unstable democratic governments that never achieved to finish their term. So we had 6 coups since 1930, and 2 long-term dictatorships in 1966 and 1976. The last one was the civil military dictatorship that lasted from 1976 to 1983, and this is and ever since then, and hopefully we will have democracy there. So we should always start, of course, how can we talk about Argentina without talking about Perón? Juan Domingo Perón was the 3 times president of Argentina, but the Primer Peronismo, the first Perón's governments were from 1946 to 1955. He was ousted by Revolución Libertadora, and he was first in Panama, and then he eventually ended up in Spain, where he lived for 18 years. And as we could see, that from that period until 1973, 1973, we had these weak governments that were intermittent with the subsequent coups, and then eventually in 1973, Perón returns to the government. It's called Segundo Peronismo, Second Perón's government. And he eventually dies in 1974, and his third wife, Isabelita Perón, succeeds him as a president because she was the vice president. Already in this period, we could see that there were problems with the military taking the national security in its own hands, in the sense of abducting people and disappearing them. So we could, when we talk about forced disappearances, we should not only concentrate on the civil military dictatorship, we should also talk about the previous period. There was this called a AAA, which is a very important like death squads that abducted people and tortured and disappeared them. But we could say that, well, since Isabel Perón came into power as the president, it was a very unstable period, which ended, unfortunately, in 1976, on 24th of March, 1976, when the civil military dictatorship came into power, which was led by General Jorge Rafael Videla, and it was called the Junta. And they introduced something that was called the national reorganization process, which significantly restructured the economy, which is one thing that we usually forget because we are mostly concentrated on the grave breaches of human rights. They imposed a program of state terrorism, which was aimed at eliminating political dissent, meaning the leftist movements, but not only the leftists. And it left a legacy of estimated 30,000 desaparecidos, meaning the missing or the disappeared people. What is also very important is that the Argentinian dictatorship was not the only one in South America. We know very well about the Plan Condor, which was the organized and coordinated dictatorships all over Latin America that were aided by CIA, by the United States in the struggle against leftist movements. So we know very well that this national reorganization process, called El Proceso in Argentina by the military, is something that is part of a broader context of, the Monroe Doctrine and of the US treating Latin America as its backyard and trying to install the governments that were of their liking and not the leftist government. We know what happened in Chile in 1973 when Salvador Allende, the first socialist president in Latin America that was democratically elected, was ousted. Well, he eventually committed suicide. We know that the same also happened in Uruguay, in Paraguay, in Brazil, etc., etc. So this is a part of a broader problematic of dictatorships in 1970s and 1980s in Latin America. So this national reorganization process had this severe consequences. Also, there is one thing that I would like to point out is that sometimes, and it's a very like a juicy title, people tend to talk about it as a dirty war. Dirty war is also something that the dictatorship itself installed as a term because it was talking about a war. Because if we're talking about a war against your own citizens, then in a war everything is permitted. But then they were talking about dirty war because they had to apply dirty tools in order to solve the issue of leftism. So if you ever say to an Argentinian dirty war, you will most certainly get negative reactions because you are talking about the fact that if it was a war, then the casualties were justified, and they weren't. So so it had a legacy of 30,000 desaparecidos. And it had all over the country, it had these clandestine detention centers where people were abducted and tortured and eventually disappeared Most of them, or many of them, were killed in so-called death flights, which means that they were first put to sleep and then they were thrown out of planes into Rio de la Plata so that they would drown there and disappear the bodies. This is the map of Gran Buenos Aires, and you can see the amount or the number of clandestine detention centers, and this is the map of Argentina, where you can also see that they're mostly all over the country, these detention centers. The most important were, of course, in Buenos Aires, but also in Mendoza, in Cordoba, La Perla, etc., etc. So we can see that it was widespread and it was generalized violence against the, well, first of all, there were these groups, two groups which were called Montoneros, which were Peronist youth, and also ERP, Ejército Revolucionario del Pueblo, so it's People's Revolutionary Army, which were extreme leftists, who were in fact practically erased from the map until June 1976, El ERP, and Montoneros were also the target of this dictatorship when they were being disappeared. But not only members of that, there were also people who were completely, they were leaders of unions, also young people, people who were involved in villas, in slums, who were working in social projects, also people who were also nuns, priests, etc., etc. Anyone who would be considered as a suspect could be disappeared. There was no clear rule. Also, another thing that was important, apart from the assassinations and disappearances and death flights, is the stealing of the babies. So many women were abducted while they were pregnant, and then they would wait for them to give birth, and then their babies would be adopted or given for adoption, or better said, appropriation of to the members of the military, or also the members of people who were close to the military regime. So apart from 30,000 disappeared, we could see we have around 500 to 600 missing babies, and up until today 129 were identified and found, restituted. So this is one of the main thing that we have to take into account in order to understand the whole complexities, that this is one of the symbols of dictatorship in Argentina. It's the green Ford Falcon car, which is the car that the military and police use, the death squads, to kidnap people, and then they would take them to these clandestine centers where they would torture them and eventually kill them. Also, well, this one to the right, you can see the deconstructed Ford Falcon in the Heraldo Conti Museum, which is one of the main symbols also of the end of the dictatorship. So one of the main centers is Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, called ESMA, which were around 5,000 people were passed through, and it was one of the main centers of torture in Buenos Aires, and it is practically in the core of the rich neighborhood of Buenos Aires. It is like very near the Monumental Stadium of River Plate. This is one of the main centers, which is also today a museum. And if you ever go to Buenos Aires, I would recommend you to go there, because the exhibition is centered, is based on the results and all the proofs that were shown in the junta trials and the trials after 2000. So they're practically using the evidence to show the exhibition. And it is a very useful exhibition, because there you will see how the dictatorship functioned, how the torture functioned, and you could see all the complexity of this forced disappearances by the military. So after at the end of the dictatorship, we know that the dictatorship practically ended because they lost the war in Malvinas, in the Falkland Islands, because they tried to save their reputation by entering into war with Great Britain, which also was a very big mistake, and ended up with Argentina losing eventually all the negotiations that it did with Great Britain in order to get back Malvinas, and also, it also ended with the dictatorship, luckily, on the other hand. So Raúl Alfonsín from Unión Cívica Radical won the elections, and before the elections, the military adopted a law which was practically a self-amnesty law, trying to save themselves from any future trials, but they didn't succeed to do that. Unlike the case, for instance, in Uruguay, where we have this pact of impunity. So when Alfonsín became president, he set up this CONADEP, which is the National Commission on the Disappeared. Could you please turn off your mics? Okay, thank you. So, so the CONADEP was installed, and it was led by the writer Ernesto Sabato, and they had this term of 6 to 9 months, and they had the task to investigate the forced disappearances committed by the military regime. And they published a report called Nunca Más, which is a famous report, and it is the most sold book in Argentina. And CONADEP at that time, so already 6 months after the term of CONADEP, they established that there were around 9,000 cases of disappearances. And today the figure is estimated at more than 30,000. So the question of the issue of the number of victims is also very important, because some people who try to deny the number of victims, also they say there weren't 30,000, there were 9,000, because CONADEP said that, but we have to take this into account, the fact that CONADEP only had 6 months of term, and many people were afraid of approaching them immediately after the dictatorship. There was a lot of instability. So if in 6 months the commission established that there were 9,000 cases, we can imagine that 30,000 is a realistic number. And as we said, around 600 abducted babies, many people who were in exile. So it is a big, huge generalized trauma for the society. Also, one thing is that we know how the disappeared were defined by Videla himself. He said they're neither dead or alive, they're disappeared, they're missing. So until you don't have the corpse, you cannot do anything. So this is one of the perversions of the system. So one of the things that we have to also mention here, that already during the dictatorship, we have this initiatives of the civil society organizations, and especially the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, who were the mothers of the disappeared, who already in 1977 started to do these rounds around Plaza de Mayo, asking for the information on the destiny of their children. And for those of you who don't know, they gathered at Plaza de Mayo, and then the police told them that they couldn't stay, they couldn't stop, they couldn't stand at the square, and that they had to circulate. And this is how the rounds were created. This is why they're doing rounds. So since 30th of April of 1977, they have been doing these rounds around Plaza de Mayo, asking for the information on their children. And these rounds are a big event. Every Thursday you could see them still. They're doing the rounds, not now during the COVID-19, but you have these rounds ever since 30th of April of 1977, and people always join the mothers every Thursday at 3:30. So if you ever go to Buenos Aires, I would recommend you to do that. These mothers are today very elderly people, elderly women. Well, they're also fathers, and they are today joined by the younger generation. I will talk about it a little bit later. Apart from mothers, there are also the grandmothers, abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, who are dedicated more than anything to the restitution of the abducted grandchildren. And as I said, so far they have restituted 130 grandchildren, and this is the last one that we could see. Every time they do that, they have a press conference, and it is also a very complex issue because, and I will talk about it a little bit later, because they managed to do this national bank of genetical data and family files, etc., etc., so that one day when they find a grandchild, that this person can have all the information, or well, most of the information that they could gather on their parents, because usually their parents are also disappeared. So what is very important is first that Alfonsine gave the chance of to the military tribunals to try the perpetrators, to try the junta. However, they did not do that, and then they adopted the law where the appeals court of Buenos Aires could take over the trial. So this is where we have the junta trials in 1985, and this is the first case where practically immediately after the end of a non-democratic period, we have the perpetrators who are tried before national courts, by the national courts in their own country, which is a very important thing, because if we think about other realities, well, especially ex-Yugoslavia, we know that we had to have an international court that took over that role, because none of the countries was ready to try their own perpetrators. So this is one thing that is also very important. We could see that the junta trials, they were opened on 22nd of April, and Jorge Videla and Emilio Macera were sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes of assassination, confinement, and torture, and other leaders of the junta were sentenced to varying terms of imprisonment. So it was pretty quick procedure, and we could see that this was a very, very big step. So apart from Nunca Más and CONADEP, Argentina did not only establish a truth commission, it also established, had its trials at home. However, it caused a lot of instability because the military wasn't purged. So because there was so many pressures from the discontent from the army because of these trials, then Alfonsine had to make a step back, and he adopted, first of all, this full stop law, Ley de Punto Final, which established a deadline of 60 days to bring forward complaints or charges against members of the army and the police. And that also, well, what do Argentinians do? They only had 60 days, so they pressed charges, as many charges as they could in these 60 days. So this was one of the things that so we could see one step forward, well, two steps forward, CONADEP and junta trials, and then steps back with full stop law and also the due obedience law in 1987, because there was unrest, there were rebellions in certain barracks. He adopted the so-called due obedience law that guaranteed impunity to all of the military personnel with a lower rank than colonel, because supposedly they were only obeying orders when they were committing crimes. This was an attempt to appease the unrest because the country was unstable. So we could see that this is one of the things that was not really, well, of course, very well accepted by the mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, because they saw it as a betrayal, of course. And but again, this is the only thing that Alfonsine could do at the time, because if we look at the context, the country in transition was really unstable. But then President Carlos Menem came into power, and he signed the indulto, which means the pardons, and he forgave those who were in charge of the dictatorships, meaning the junta. So Videla was released from prison, and that was a very, very big blow to the movement for truth and memory and justice. Also, we should say that the mothers and the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo always organized marches on 24th of March requesting truth, memory and justice, and also pointing to the fact that the perpetrators are still among them and that they should be tried. So when this started with the pardons, that was a huge blow, and it was 2 steps back or 3 steps back in this struggle for justice. However, these presidential pardons and the due obedience law and the full stop law did not apply to the abduction of children. So what did the grandmothers and mothers do? They just continued, on the one hand, with the trials for the abduction of children, which is one thing that was not under the pardon laws, and also they started they adapted to the new situation. So they also started with the foundation of CONADI, which is Comisión Nacional de Derecho a la Identidad, National Commission of the Right to Identity, and the National Bank of Genetic Data. They formed that. So this is how they also started to form these files for every child that was missing, so that they could recognize, identify this child once he or she was found, or he or she approached them because they doubted their own identity. And as I said, since it wasn't applied to the abduction of children, Videla was again tried and found guilty for the abduction of children. Videla, Macera, Bignone, in 1998. So in spite of the fact that Menem pardoned them, Videla was back to prison because of the abduction of children. There was also one thing that was very significant, which was the truth trials. So since there weren't any trials, apart from the abduction of children, there were no ordinary criminal trials. Then they organized these truth trials, which were based on the right of the relatives and the society to know the truth and to bury and mourn their dead, which is called derecho a duelo. So this is how they organized since 1999 in La Plata, and in other cities they organized the truth trials. And in La Plata they were held every Wednesday, the truth trials, where people could get to know the destiny or what happened to their children or their relatives. And also from these truth trials, eventually in the next period, when these pardon laws were abolished, we could see that the evidence that was exposed in the truth trials was eventually used as evidence for the criminal trials in itself. So we can see that the civil society organizations never really gave up, and they were adapting to the situations, and they were doing as much as they could within the limitations that they had with the government in power. So this is what happened practically during Menem times. But then in 2000, we could see that there was a new wave of trials. First of all, the federal judge Gabriel Cavallo accepted a complaint deeming that the amnesty laws were unconstitutional and therefore invalid. We know that Argentina has the same legal system as the US, which is the Anglo-Saxon system, which allows for the federal courts to establish precedents, and then if they're validated by the Supreme Court, then they can become the law. So this is what happened. When one judge adopted that, we could see that then the Federal Court of Appeal confirmed it, and then eventually we could see that also in 2001 the federal judge accused the forces for the responsibility in the Plan Condor, and Videla was again one of the military accused and remained under house arrest. And also in 2003, we can see the strong change, a big change with the coming to power of Nestor Kirchner, who quashed the decree that blocked the possibility of extraditing army officers responsible for the repression, and he also openly supported the invalidation of the amnesty laws. So we can also see, which is one thing that we should also be aware of, the fact of the political will and the political influence on the waves of trials and memory politics in Argentina, but in general in the world. We have to see when there is political will from the top down, then many things can happen. And this is what really happened with Kirchner coming into power. One of the main things that Kirchner did symbolically is, this is a scene from ESMA on 24th of March 2004, when he made the military bring down Videla's portrait, which was there until 2004. So for 21 years, it was still hanging on the walls of army premises. And also on 24th of March, which is the anniversary of the beginning of the military dictatorship in 2004, Nestor Kirchner publicly apologized in the name of the Argentinian government for the crimes committed during the dictatorship. And it was a new beginning for this quest for truth, memory, and justice. Also, well, we could see that it was a really big boom, and this is where then the Supreme Court abolished the full stop law, the disobedience law, and Menem's pardons, because it was not in line with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and also the Inter-American Convention, etc., etc. So we can see that from 2000 we have this new wave of justice, especially because truth and memory were always there. And then also following diverse decision by the Inter-American Court, it's the same as ECHR, European Court of Human Rights. They have the same function. So what you can resort to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights when you already exhaust all the legal remedies in your own country. So this is what happened. So many people, after exhausting all the legal remedies before Argentinian courts, they resorted to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So according to their decisions, the state has an obligation to investigate, prosecute and punish those who have committed violations of the right to law, so to life, etc., etc. So this is why it could not be abolished or limited by these pardon laws, amnesty, or due obedience laws. So this is how we could see that it allowed the domestic and international investigation, again, for the torture and disappearance and killings of more than 30,000 persons. We know that we cannot try the people for the same crimes twice, but there were other crimes that still weren't investigated or prosecuted. So this is what gave way to trying again the same people. So this is what happened with Videla. We could see that there was the reopening of the Videla trial. This is Videla, in case you don't, in the middle, in case you don't recognize him, because he was such a tough guy when he was in the military, but then he grew old and he's a different person when he's in civilian. So first of all, then also the federal judge deemed the Carlos Menem's pardons unconstitutional. So then in 2008, first of all, they decided that Videla, who was in house arrest, should be sent to Campo de Mayo prison. And also there was the discovery of 40 victims in Buenos Aires. And then the Supreme Court also upheld the ruling that the pardons should be abolished. So, and also they tried him again for new crimes. So to cut the long story short, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, among other people. And he was guilty of crimes of torture, murder, and torture followed by death. And he eventually was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the systematic kidnapping of children during his tenure. And he, in 2013, he died in the Marcos Paz prison, civilian prison, which is very important, after he suffered a fall in a shower. There's also another version of this that he practically was died while he was on the toilet, but this is like these are the details that we do not have to know. But what is very important is that Videla, which was the leader of the military junta, died in the civilian prison as a regular civilian, and he was serving his sentence among regular detainees, common criminals, murderers, etc., which was a big blow for Videla himself. So to summarize what happened in this period is, if we look at, as I already said, if we look at the problematics of political will, we can see that during Alfonsín, we have the junta trials, but then we have the due obedience and full stop law. And then when Menem came into power, there were presidential pardons, and but on the other hand, we have truth trials by the civil society that did not and the NGOs for human rights that did not want to give up on the struggle. And then when Nestor Kirchner and eventually Cristina Fernandez, his wife, when they came into power, that we can see the new wave of trials. However, this also stopped when Cristina Fernandez, she stepped down, and Mauricio Macri won the elections, and we could see a new step back in the struggle for truth, memory, and justice. And we could see, first of all, that they advocated for a lot of house arrests of the former perpetrators and the members of junta and the military and police repression, because on the grounds that they were already poor elderly people with poor health conditions. And they also introduced something that is called 2x1, 2-for-1, and I will explain what this is. So we can see that we had this new wave of trials because there were governments who were in favor of solving the issue, but then we have another blow back with Macri, who lost the elections in December last year, and this was a period of a big step back in the struggle for truth and memory. So if we look at just to give you this image of what happened from 2007, let's say, to 2019, so when this new wave of trials really happened, we had 3,225 persons that were accused for crimes against humanity, and it is a pretty big number. Then if we look at how many trials were there and they were finished in each year, you can also see the numbers. And also if we look at, these are the sources from 2019. This is the last report of the Center for Legal and Social Studies. So 44 when they were in the investigation process, 38% were with firm sentence. And also one of the things that we had to take into account, and this is very important because this was during Macri times. So 915 were sentenced, 144 were acquitted, etc., etc. And this is a very important information that 67% of the people who were accused of crimes against humanity were in house arrests. If you also are asking about, I imagine that you're all Spanish speaking, condenadas, absueltas, procesadas, this is also one of the new ways of gender neutral denomination and using gender neutral nouns, which maybe I can talk about it in the next summer school. I won't talk about that today, but just to give you one hint if you may be interested in that. So we can see that during Macri times, 67 people were in house arrest, which is a very big problem, especially for the human rights organizations. But don't think that they gave up. What they did is something that is called escrache, which is public shaming. If there is this saying in Argentina, si no hay justicia hay escrache, if there's no justice, there will be public shaming. So they would stand before, first of all, they would paint the street where the perpetrator lived, and they would say here, this and that, the name genocide perpetrator lives, and they would put signs, or they will even have public performances in front of their houses. They would make protests, and they would also have people watching over them, over their houses, because if you're in house arrest, you mustn't get out of the house. So they would have people watching over them, and if they would get out of their house once, they would take photos of them, they would send it to the court, and then they would get them back to jail because they broke their house arrest. So you can see that Argentinians are really very, very, they have a lot of grit when it comes to this struggle for human rights. And so this is what they would do. They would do escraches, and they would follow the perpetrators and make sure that they're really in the house, not leaving their houses. So on the other hand, when we talked about the new wave of trials, we also have the new wave, or the new groups of that are participating. One of them are, of course, hijos, which are the children of the disappeared, who also joined the struggles of grandmothers and mothers who are already grown-ups and who participate in all the rounds and in all the struggle for truth and memory and justice. They participate regularly in the protests, and of course, we also have this one group of hijos and nietos and grandchildren who are restituted, who also joined the struggle of grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. But it is also a very important thing, and if you're interested, there are a lot of documentaries and materials about them and how this restitution of identity is a very, very hard process, because you have to accept the fact that you were practically abducted, and that the people who brought you up are practically were either close to the regime or were part of the regime, and they participated in the abduction or appropriation or in the torture of your real biological parents. So this is one of the things where many people struggle with, because they have to accept the fact that practically people who brought them up were the people who maybe even killed their biological parents. And also one of the main things, which is a big problem, is that when they are identified, usually the people who appropriated them end up being tried for the appropriation. And this is a big identity clash, because you are practically processing your own, foster parents who abducted you and who brought you up, and you can imagine that it must be a very difficult process. In fact, one of the restituted grandchildren committed suicide precisely because of that. But then we have another group that appeared as a group on 10th of May of 2017 with this Dos por Uno protests. These Dos por Uno protests were the protests against this court decision that decided to give the benefit of 241 to Luis Muiña, one of the perpetrators, and which is the right to benefit from a law that says that the time a person spends in prison prior to receiving a conviction should count double toward the sentencing total. This law was derogated even before, but the fact that it was applied to the member of military dictatorship was very problematic. And this is where we have this Historias Desobedientes that joined the struggle. So this is the moment when they entered the scene. They joined these protests. These were massive protests. They gathered around 500,000 people on the streets of Buenos Aires that were protesting against this decision, because as soon as the Supreme Court gave the Dos por Uno to Luis Muiña, for instance, Miguel Echecolatz, who was sentenced to several, I think 6 life imprisonments, also asked for that. So we can see that it could have caused a wave of other perpetrators of genocide, as they call genocide, benefiting from this sentence. Eventually, the Supreme Court annullated the decision, but as I said, this is what caused the coming of Historias Desobedientes, disobedient stories coming into scene. So Historias Desobedientes, as I said, they entered the scene in 2017 effectively, but we could see that it was a struggle of many of them even before, because these are the children of the genocide perpetrators who practically had to break the mandate of their family to join the struggle of the civil society organizations and the association of victims to break away from their own parents, really. And it is you can imagine that it is a very difficult process, and they did several things, and I will talk about them. Some of them changed their surnames, which is not a very easy process in Argentina. They joined the protests of Dos por Uno. They march every 24th of March with the civil society organizations, and they are now very well accepted in this struggle. And also they submitted a draft with a congresswoman on the changing of the law that says that the children cannot testify against their parents because they showed the will to testify against their parents, because some of them really have valuable informations, but they could not testify because the law prohibited that, banned that to them. So these are the stories. I will talk about some of the stories of them. I will not enter too much into detail. I mean, I would, and it's a very emotional story. These are very emotional stories. I attended some of their lectures, and you can see that these people really went through many important issues before breaking away from their parents. So one of them is Mariana do Passo, ex-Echecolatz. She's the daughter of Miguel Echecolatz, who was the senior member of Buenos Aires Province Police. He was sentenced to several life sentences in different trials. And what Mariana did is that she renounced from her surname. As I said, it is not easy to renounce from your surname or change your surname in Argentina, because unlike in Croatia and I imagine in Serbia and other countries, you just go to the registry office and you say, I want to be called Pepe Lopez, and that's it. In Argentina, you cannot change your name if you don't have a just cause. So a court has to decide on that. So in order to have a just cause, you have to justify why you want to change your surname. So this is where you practically give a political statement, a political declaration, justifying that your parent or your father, most of them were fathers, well, almost the majority of them did this and that, and this is why you want to detach from his surname and from his legacy. This is what happened with Mariana do Passo Echecolatz. She stated, I mean, it wasn't that difficult for her because her father was first tried in 1980s, but then again afterwards. And as I said, he was sentenced to several life sentences in different trials. So the court stated that apart from that, from the fact that her father was the perpetrator of genocide, she also had suffered very hard psychological consequences, because this is something that contradicts Hannah Arendt's banality of evil, that was talking about the Nazi perpetrators when she was talking about how they were committing crimes against the others, which were the Jews, exterminating them, but then for instance, they would kill Jewish children, but then they would come home and sing lullabies to their children. That was not the case in Argentinian dictatorships. They were sadists at home also. So she suffered psychological and physical abuse and torture in her own house. And also because of carrying this name, which was really a known name of the dictatorship, she, for instance, when she started to go to university, she wrote an exam, and when she came to pick up the exam, a professor told her, your exam disappeared. So she was suffering consequences of being the daughter of Echecolatz, without having anything to do with what Echecolatz did, and also being a victim of Echecolatz at home. So she ended up studying and graduating from psychology, but at a private university, because the public university, we could agree that it was completely unfair what happened to her, but she could not study at the public university because she was constantly being discriminated for being Echecolatz's daughter. So she's not the only one. The first one that did it was Rita Preti Vallati. She did it in 2008. She only took her mother's surname because she was the one that did it first. Mariana did it in 2014, but Mariana is a very strong name because Echecolatz is one of the biggest perpetrators who was tried. So this is why the biggest villain. So this is why her actions are very important. She also participated in the marches of 24th of March, etc., etc. Another case is Analia Kalinets, who has this blog on Facebook, Historias Desobedientes y con Errores de Ortografía. She's also daughter of Eduardo Kalinets, Dr. K, who was the member of the federal police. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and she practically didn't know anything about what her father did until 2005, when her mother called her up and she said, your dad is in jail for political reasons. And then that is when she started to investigate. She went to the trials. She went to see what happened, and then this is how she realized that her father was very cruel, especially cruel. And although he was not a high rank, he was one of the people who was very eager in torturing. He was not the top official, but he was very eager, and he was particularly cruel. This is why he was called Dr. K. So this is what also made her talk about this. And she works a lot. She's one of the members of Historias, one of the founders. She also, she says that she started to normalize this, or accept or assimilate what happened to her, in fact, that her father was a perpetrator, is that her son told everyone in the kindergarten that his grandfather is in prison because he killed a lot of people. And this is when she said, well, yes, this is how that should be said. This is, you don't have anything to do with this. You should be able to recognize this without having anything to do. But you can imagine that this is a very strong process. Her other sisters disagree with her. You're practically ousted from the family in most of the cases, or it is a very difficult process. So you have to, in order to make this step, and in order to join this struggle and really come to terms with the crimes that were committed by your parents, you really have to be aware that you might be completely ousted from the family. One of them, Bibiana Raivaldi, said that her father said, "Don't ask how I was doing my job." The others one said that when he confronted his father regarding the crimes that he did, his father accompanied him to the doorstep of their house, and he opened the door and he said, "God help you," and closed the door, and he never saw him again. So these are the things that we have to take into account, that these are the people who really made a big effort, a big psychological effort, and to assume what their parents did. Many of them were also victims of their own parents, but they assumed that as a part of the society, they didn't want to have anything to do with the crimes. So as I said, this is Erika Lederer. She's the daughter of Ricardo Lederer, who is the obstetrician who participated in the appropriation of children. She even wrote a book, I Don't Forgive Him, No Lo Perdono. Not all of them are always members of Historias Desobedientes, but in general, what is very important is that this Historias Desobedientes are really people who joined as a group and who are also trying to contribute to this struggle for justice in the Argentinian society. And also it is very important to see that maybe they already were assuming what their parents did, but their strong reaction came when Macri came into power and wanted to reverse this process. So they practically apart from protesting, participating in the protests, they also signed and testified against their parents getting house arrests. They, and as I said, they also advocated, and this is the case of Pablo Verna, who is the son of Julio Alejandro Verna, who was a doctor, who sedated prisoners before throwing them in the ocean. And he's the one that worked on the draft of the law to change and to help them being able to testify against their parents in order to make sure that they stay in prison as they should, and also the fact that they could also help to finding certain evidence for the trials, or also helping people get the information, as we already talked about, the right of to information. To get the information they needed. Because, for instance, one of them, Nicolás Ruarte, said that when he confronted his father a long time ago, he told him, "Don't go around talking bullshit. It wasn't 30,000 here. Here you have the lists." And then he threw a bunch of papers before him with names that they were torturing. So we can see that within the families, in spite of the fact that there is this pact of silence within the families, the people have the information, or they know something, or they remember something that can help the families of the victims at least find their beloved ones, or get the information how they were killed or disappeared. So this is one of the things that we have to take into account. Of course, as I said, not all of them participate. This is one of the cases which is also very important. This is the first case when one child could testify before the adoption of the law. This is Vanina Falco and Juan Cabandier. Vanina Falco is the daughter of Luis Falco, the biological daughter, who testified against her father because of the appropriation of then Mariano Falco, which is Juan Cabandier, who was appropriated by her father, who was the police officer. So she broke away from her family, and she also testified in order against her father for the illegal appropriation of Juan Cabandier, which is her brother, not biological brother, and he eventually ended up sentenced to 18 years of prison. So we can see that it is a very interesting phenomenon because, as I said, the struggle for truth and the struggle for justice in general in post-transitional society is a very hard one, because we can see that in general the society, we have one part of the society who is in favor, the other part of the society who is against. We have all the political reasons, the democratic and political instability of the country, but we can see that in Argentina, which is a very interesting example, first of all, the political will is very important, but we can see that the whole society is aware of the dangers of giving up and not being vigilant regarding everything that is going on. And by all means, the Historias Disobedientes is a very important new actor, because they are also showing that not all of the families want to be obedient. If we make the parallel to the obedience law, where all of them were supposedly just obeying the laws and obeying the orders, that even the families don't have to obey this obedience pact. So this is the book that they published, Escritos Desobedientes, which is a very interesting one. They don't contain all of the testimonies, but it is a very interesting book to read. I would recommend it to you. You can buy it even through Amazon digitally, and it is a very interesting book. And also, I found one interesting writing there, that one of the daughters put que no descanse en paz, let him not rest in peace, because they are aware of the fact that many of them still even love their parents, but they cannot forgive them what they did. So that's it. I hope I didn't spend too much time, and thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, I would be more than glad to respond. I don't know if I can somehow flip the...
You just turn off. Thank you very much. It was... Could you find it?
No, not yet.
Okay. Never mind. I will keep talking.
Okay.
No, it was really, really great. And again, we have provoked. We can see a lot of questions and a lot of interventions. So it was really inspirative. And thank you very much for this presentation. I will now invite a colleague of mine from CBAM, Jelena Borlin, to help us with questions. But still, I would like to ask you.
Okay.
Firstly, I think we will continue this dialogue next year. I'm sure, because really we already have a new topic, or the continuity in this topic for the next year. But I would like to use an intervention and question of Amanda Silvestre de Silva de Brasil. Entonces, me parece muy importante. Tú puedes dar la respuesta en español, en inglés, como te gusta. Pero es importante para Brasil, pero para los Balcanes me parece también. Así que ¿Qué hizo que la política de la memoria en Argentina fuera tan exitosa? Después de tantos años, ¿cuáles serían los primeros pasos para construir una política de memoria, verdad y justicia efectiva? En realidad me parece muy importante la respuesta para los todos. Y después, Yelena, por favor, siga.
Bueno, si puedo en castellano, para mí mejor.
Muy bien.
Fue, como lo diríamos en Argentina, remándola en dulce leche. No, bien. ¿Qué es lo que hizo que fuera tan exitosa? Primero, que la sociedad argentina es una sociedad que elabora mucho todo lo que le pasa. Sabemos que Buenos Aires es la segunda patria de Freud. Ellos hacen mucho psicoanálisis, mucha introspección, ellos necesitan comunicar y procesar todo lo que les pasa, así que por eso creo que, bueno, por un lado es muy importante que tomar eso en cuenta, cómo es la sociedad en Argentina en general. Segundo, que ellos tenían una sociedad civil fuerte desde los comienzos del siglo, entonces eso también hace que siempre haya gente que, a diferencia de los Balcanes o la ex Yugoslavia, que no tenía una sociedad civil fuerte por otras razones políticas e históricas, entonces eso hace que también sepan de sus derechos, sepan cómo ejercerlos, que es una diferencia muy grande. Nosotros, o sea, recién empezamos con la transición a la democracia en los 90, que fue interrumpida por las guerras, recién empezó en el año 2000, tenemos largo camino por recorrer y bueno, es otra conformación de la sociedad. Por otro lado, también tenemos que tomar en cuenta la perspectiva femenina. Son las madres y las abuelas, y las historias desobedientes, la mayoría son mujeres las que quiebran ese mandato patriarcal, ¿no? También, bueno, por otro lado, si pensamos en las madres y en las abuelas, todas ellas dicen que la verdad que ellas mismas no esperaban, ellas eran señoras bien, que trabajaban por ahí en una escuela como maestras o algo, que si no hubiera pasado lo que pasó con sus hijos, ellas nunca se hubieran involucrado en esa lucha. Entonces, es también, pensándolo desde lo biológico, una madre que pierde a un hijo ya no tiene nada que perder. Entonces, es algo, ustedes que son madres lo sabrán mejor que yo. Entonces, cuando no tenés nada que perder, tenés que luchar por todo, por cualquier cosa, para por lo menos saber qué es lo que pasó con tus hijos y con tus nietos. Y aparte, lo que a mí me gusta mucho es la lucha de las madres y de las abuelas, parte del amor y de puro, no parte del odio. Entonces esa es una cosa que también cuando el principal motivo, el motor es el amor, y es el amor por tu hijo, entonces que vos tenés el derecho de saber qué es lo que pasó y todo, entonces te movilizan otras cosas. Entonces eso es lo que ellas hicieron, esas carpetas de familia, para que una vez encontrado el nieto pueda conocer la historia de su familia. Y por ejemplo, cuando lo encuentran, esa persona es la que decide cómo y cuándo se quiere acercar a la familia o no. Tiene todo derecho de no acercarse y de no querer hacer nada. Ellas están contentas solo por encontrarlo. Ya te encontramos, ya sabemos dónde estás y ya sabemos que estás bien. Y con eso nos conformamos. No nos conformamos, no queremos ejercer ninguna violencia en contra de vos, no queremos forzarte en que hagas algo. Te dejamos la puerta abierta y vos podés hacer lo que vos quieras. Y yo creo que eso es una cosa muy importante. Y bueno, eso es lo de no bajar los brazos nunca. Bueno, Argentina también tiene miles de problemas económicos, es un país que quiebra cada 20 años, pero la gente nunca baja los brazos. Eso también es una cosa que hay que tener en cuenta. Entonces, bueno, cuando Menem introdujo los indultos, bueno, hay juicios por la verdad. Bueno, no se juzgan por los asesinatos, por las torturas, pero por los bebés sí. Entonces, hacemos todo lo que podemos dentro del marco que se nos da. Cuando hay una nueva oleada de juicios, bueno, ahí le damos con todo, pero cuando Macri intentó revertir el efecto del anterior gobierno, salieron todas a las calles. Entonces, la sociedad civil es muy fuerte, es una sociedad civil que hace mucho, que tiene una larga historia, pero es una sociedad civil que no solo que existe desde hace mucho tiempo, sino que crece. Por eso, el hecho de que las generaciones cambian, pero, por ejemplo, no se suman. Por ejemplo, pudimos ver también en la época de Macri, cuando quisieron parar una ronda, quisieron arrestar a las madres, eso se dio la noticia, pero yo no sé, en 15 minutos, en media hora, la gente corrió a la sede de las madres, hicieron un cordón humano que siguió el camión, bueno, la combi que llevó a las madres hasta la plaza, hicieron un bloqueo para que no puedan arrestar a las madres. Ahí se ve que hay cosas que hoy en día son incuestionables, pero no lo fueron todo el tiempo, ¿no? Eran cosas, era una lucha con sus altibajos, que siguió y que sigue, porque bueno, por ahí ahora, bueno, con el COVID no sabemos, pero ahora el gobierno de ahora también está a favor de los juicios, pero no sabemos qué gobierno puede venir. Por eso la sociedad civil es la que tiene que defender los derechos, porque la voluntad política es volátil. Entonces creo que la sociedad civil es clave en todas esas luchas.
Nuestra sociedad civil está tan lejos de este nivel.
Lo sé,
Increíble.
desgraciadamente.
Bueno, yo me callo. Yelena Berlin, por favor.
Ok. ¿Me oyen, no?
Sí.
Ah, perfecto. Pues hola a todos, porque eso es la primera vez que puedo hablar con todos vosotros. Estoy primero muy alegre que tengo la oportunidad de estar aquí, escuchar y aprender todos esos días. Pero vamos a pasar las preguntas. O si prefieres, Nikolina, hablamos en inglés.
No, está mejor con el castellano.
Ok, perfecto. Entonces, tenemos aquí una compañera, Anka Sabu, que quería preguntarte algo personalmente. Así que, Anka, si quieres, puedes.
Sí, gracias. Hola, Nikolina. Muchísimas gracias por la presentación, de verdad impresionante. Mi pregunta se relaciona con el paso natural del tiempo, porque le quería preguntar cómo afecta eso al proceso de la recuperación de la identidad. Gracias.
Bueno, las abuelas tienen esa política, tienen esa campaña a la que se sumaron mucha gente conocida, bueno, el equipo argentino de fútbol, Messi, se sumaron y tienen esa campaña. Si naciste entre el 76 o 75 y 81 y dudas de tu identidad, acércate a las abuelas. Entonces hay como una campaña constante. Hay mucha gente que también, bueno, algo te suena, o sea, hay mucha gente que se da cuenta de que pasó algo, hay algunos que encima esperan que pase el tiempo, que se mueran los padres para hacerlo, hay algunos que dudan y no están seguros, pero hoy en día saben que existe este banco genético de datos y saben que se pueden acercar y averiguarlo. Es un proceso muy largo, o sea, hay mucha gente que tardó 10 años o 15 años hasta que se acercaron finalmente para darse cuenta, algunos en los que no les dieron los datos o no se solaparon los datos porque no están guardados en el Banco Nacional de Datos Genéticos. Primero es el proceso interno de la persona misma que tiene que acercarse. Por otro lado, las abuelas también trabajan en eso, en encontrar a las personas. Y ahí cuando las encuentran, les dicen, nosotros estamos dudando de que vos podrías ser el hijo de tal y tal. Bueno, si querés acercarte, nos gustaría. Entonces, es una cosa que es un proceso que hay también la gente que denuncia, ¿no? Sabiendo que alguien puede ser hijo de desaparecidos. Pero es una cosa que no para. De hecho, hay mucha gente que encontró su identidad a los 40 y pico de años. En la página web de las abuelas están todos los nietos recuperados y se dice su historia y todo. Algunos prefieren también todavía quedar en anonimato por sus propias cuestiones internas. Hay documentales en internet, de hecho, y en el canal Encuentro sobre todo su proceso. Hay muchos de ellos que les cuesta también entender lo que les pasó. Entonces son cosas, el tiempo sí, juega en contra más que nada de de los juicios, pero no tanto de la búsqueda de la identidad, porque la búsqueda de la identidad la hace la persona cuando está lista. A muchos les pasó, por ejemplo, que estaban dudando de su identidad cuando tuvieron hijos propios. Entonces se dieron cuenta de que por ahí ellos mismos les gustaría que sus hijos sepan quiénes son, etcétera, etcétera, si ellos mismos tenían esas dudas. Entonces, el tiempo no juega tanto en contra de la recuperación, sino más en los juicios, porque los perpetradores son ya gente grande y lo más severo es el hecho de que ellos, aparte de pocos casos, no dan los datos y tienen los datos, dónde se encuentran los cuerpos, quiénes son las personas que fueron desaparecidas, dónde fueron desaparecidas, cómo, dónde están los niños, hay muchos, ese es el problema. El problema del tiempo es más que nada en el hecho de que los genocidas o los perpetradores no dan los datos sobre los bebés, pero hay mucha gente que se dan cuenta de que si tus padres son rubios de ojos claros y vos sos morocho, te das cuenta que hay una alta probabilidad de que no seas el hijo de ellos, ¿no? Y aparte, sos hijo, no hay foto de tu mamá con la panza, te están diciendo cosas contrarias, hay algo que te resuena que puede ser que no seas hijo de ellos. Y digo, es como, de hecho yo conozco a mucha gente que en su pubertad, como, viste, en la pubertad te peleas con tus padres si quieres que ellos no sean tus padres, que encima se te ocurre que podías haber sido hijo de desaparecidos porque estos, la verdad, que no son mis padres, ¿no? Digo, como que es una cosa muy, muy presente en la sociedad argentina, ¿no? De esa generación. Entonces, todos ellos saben de la campaña y muchos se acercaron solos, por motu propio. Y Elena no se escucha. Ahí está.
Ahora sí, ahora sí. Ok, muy bien. Ok, muchísimas gracias, Nikolina. Tenemos una pregunta muy interesante de Amanda Silvestre. Ella pregunta, ¿qué hizo que la política de la memoria en Argentina fuera tan exitosa? En
Esa
Brasil...
ya la tuvimos. Esa fue la primera pregunta, me parece.
Sí, ay, perdón.
Bueno,
Es que tengo aquí el documento, quería que todos tengan la... Ok. Claudia Martínez, ella también me ha preguntado que lo lea, dice que admira y agradezca tu labor de investigación sobre tema tan complejo, claro, pero que algunos aún no tenemos la valentía de explorar, analizar y difundir. Soy mexicana y aquí tocar temas tan complejos sería peligroso. ¿Cómo ha sido su proceso de investigación? ¿Ha tenido que ser cuidadosa con la información que recoge o ha recibido apoyo y protección para continuar con su labor?
Bueno, sí, México es otra cosa. México, bueno, todos sabemos del caso de Ayotzinapa, de los 43. México es un país donde todavía, bueno, hay casos de gente que desaparece ahora y que, bueno, hay problemas de la complicidad de las fuerzas policiales con las desapariciones y eso. Y bueno, el asesinato de muchos periodistas y eso. En Argentina en eso no es el caso. Ese no es el caso para nada. Hay muchísima investigación sobre todos esos casos y hay yo creo que el trabajo más duro lo hicieron los hijos de los genocidas. Apartarse de tu propio padre y reconocer que tu propio padre es un criminal. La verdad que primero que hay que hacer un proceso interno tremendo y segundo que, bueno, hacerlo público y militar por eso, para aportar a una sociedad mejor, es una cosa que requiere mucha valentía, muchísima valentía, pero bueno, también, bueno, es gente que bueno, vive en una sociedad que es distinta de la mexicana o de los Balcanes, ¿no? Yo también, bueno, mi proceso de investigación, yo me centro en otra investigación en sí, de lo que yo escribo, y sí, a veces es un poco, hay que tener un poco de tacto, un poco de discreción, pero en general en Argentina ese no es el problema. En Argentina por ahí uno se puede encontrar con opiniones contrarias. De hecho, también, bueno, existen los hijos de genocidas que abogan por los derechos de sus padres, o sea, ojo, y que también hay una asociación donde se encuentran todos, hijos y nietos de desaparecidos, con los hijos de genocidas que están a favor o en contra de sus padres. Eso es también muy interesante, que esa gente se pueda sentar y defender diferentes posturas. Para mí habla de una sociedad muy sana, que pueda hablar con diferentes argumentos de sus posturas y no estar de acuerdo, pero saber que no estamos de acuerdo. Pero ya el primer acercamiento de intentar hablar, para mí es muy importante. Y sé que eso no se da en otras sociedades, por eso creo que es muy importante hablar de este ejemplo. Porque en otras latitudes, bueno, ¿qué le vamos a decir de los Balcanes? O sea, acá en Croacia estamos con Ustaša y Partizani desde el 41 o 45 todavía, o sea, es pleno siglo XXI, y cada uno enquistado en su postura y nadie puede hablar de una manera sensata, o sea, o con argumentos y con propiedad. Entonces, es una cosa que para Argentina es algo muy importante, que hay una enorme producción científica sobre lo que pasó, y hay muchísimas, como dije, bueno, los mismos hijos publicaron sus historias, dieron a conocer sus caras. Algunos tienen problemas con sus propios padres, uno intentó desheredar a su hija, o sea, le bloqueó la herencia de la madre, el Kalinets, porque dice que es una hija indigna, etcétera. Pero a nivel de investigación, en Argentina hay obstáculos por el pacto de silencio, pero ya no hay ese miedo que existe actualmente en México, porque uno corre el peligro de su propia vida, eso está claro. Y bueno, esperemos que con el tiempo también esas cosas surjan en otros países.
Perfecto. Ahora tenemos el compañero Trist Oliver que quería preguntarte algo personalmente.
Bien.
Boa noite.
Boa noite
a todos. Espero que yo no hablo muy bien español, yo hablo porteñol, pero
muy bien.
Vou tentar hablar en portugués, no sé si consiguen me perceber. Bueno,
a ver.
Antes de mais, muito obrigado. Foi uma boa apresentação. Tive a oportunidade de aprender muito convosco. Falo diretamente da Holanda e tenho muito interesse em saber mais sobre a América Latina. Desde já vou fazer a minha pergunta. Há alguma instituição na Argentina que visa criar contínuo comunicação para que esta problemática continue a ser discutida nas agendas internacionais, quer na União Europeia ou na ONU? Y muito obrigado, espero que conseguiram perceber.
Sí, existe, bueno, hay varios organismos de derechos humanos. Uno es el CELS, Centro de Estudios Legales y Sociales, que está involucrado internacionalmente, que trabaja, que de hecho presentaron sus informes en la ONU. Sus informes están públicos. Si van a la página web de cels.org.ar, CELS, C-E-L-S. Ellos tienen los informes anuales. No solo ahora CELS es el que trajo la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos en el año 78 a la Argentina en plena dictadura, para establecer las desapariciones. Entonces, CELS es muy activo. Con la Unión Europea sí colaboran, pero la Unión Europea, en general, hay cierto eurocentrismo de la Unión Europea mirándose su propio ombligo, y América Latina está más centrada en sí misma. Pero América Latina, a nivel de América Latina, hay redes de organismos de derechos humanos de América Latina que intercambian información. En Asunción, en Paraguay, está el archivo del Plan Cóndor, que demuestra la complicidad de todos y es accesible públicamente cuando no hay una pandemia, ¿no? Se puede ir a Asunción y al archivo del Plan Cóndor, que demuestra la coordinación de las dictaduras en desaparecer y torturar y matar a la gente. Entonces, a nivel de América Latina, hay una gran producción de intercambio. También hay investigadores en Europa que hacen esas investigaciones en cooperación, pero digo, en Europa no están tan centrados en América Latina, aparte como son dictaduras de los años 70 y 80, no se centran tanto en esas problemáticas, porque, bueno, sigue habiendo violaciones de derechos humanos. Está la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, que también que está bajo la Organización de Estados Americanos, que también tiene muchos juicios por eso. Sus archivos están también disponibles, que se pueden ver todos los juicios en el Perú, en Paraguay, Brasil, etcétera. Así que hay una enorme producción de trabajos que se pueden consultar, pero CELS es el más prominente desde Argentina. También está el International Center for Transitional Justice, que recopila todos los datos, cuya sede está en Nueva York, y ellos también tienen informes, y está ahí, por ejemplo, uno de los miembros de ese centro es Pablo de Greiff. Pablo de Greiff es el autor del libro sobre las reparaciones, ¿no? Como uno de los mecanismos de justicia transicional. Entonces, ICTJ, ese International Center for Transitional Justice, es uno de los grandes centros que difunde toda la problemática de justicia transicional en el mundo, pero también hace un seguimiento de todo lo que está pasando en América Latina todavía, porque, bueno, las consecuencias de las dictaduras son presentes hasta el día de hoy. La discriminación, la desigualdad económica, etcétera, son consecuencias a la larga de eso. Una cosa nueva que también se dio a partir de los años 2010 es esa parte civil de la dictadura, porque lo primero que se juzgó fue la dictadura, la tortura, la parte militar, pero hay muchísimas empresas que se beneficiaron de la dictadura. Por ejemplo, está el caso de Ford, Argentina, el caso de Mercedes-Benz, que fueron encontrados culpables por haber sido cómplices y lo tienen en inglés hasta los resultados de los juicios, porque todos los miembros de sindicatos, todos sus trabajadores que eran miembros de sindicatos fueron desaparecidos para deshacerse de problemas sindicales en su empresa, en su fábrica, ¿no? Aparte de los que, bueno, también se apropiaron de algunas empresas muy grandes, como es el caso de Papel Prensa, que es la única empresa que produce el papel para los diarios en Argentina, que el propietario de esa empresa supuestamente firmó una donación al que es el Mañeto, el dueño de Clarín. Entonces, hay un aspecto muy fuerte que, bueno, aparte de las desapariciones de las personas, un aspecto económico y aparte todo el programa económico que llevó a la Argentina a una gravísima crisis, una de las también es mérito y el endeudamiento es mérito de la junta militar, de la que no se habló tanto porque claramente las vidas son las más importantes. No sé si me pudiste entender. Intenté hablar lento.
Ok. Pues desgraciadamente tenemos tiempo solo para una pregunta más. Sebastián Fuentes, a él le interesa por qué la dictadura en Perú y en Chile está celebrada por parte de muchas personas, pero en Argentina ocurre precisamente lo opuesto.
Bueno, no sé. En Chile, bueno, es cuestión de la composición de la sociedad, de quienes más tienen más voz o quien habla más fuerte. En Chile, yo no diría que sea así. Bueno, mis amigos, los amigos que yo tengo son todos hijos gente que estuvo en exilio, que creció en exilio. Una de mis amigas vivió en un total de 17 países. Y ellos no son los que dicen, pero sí, de Chile sí, todos dicen, por un lado, bueno, lo de Chile dicen que Bueno, sí, hubo dictadura, pero por otro lado hubo también prosperidad económica, entonces como si esto se pudiera nivelar. Es una cosa bueno, porque Chile tuvo muy buena colaboración económica y bueno, la sigue teniendo ¿cómo se llama? Con Estados Unidos, es el único país que fue adscrito al NAFTA, etcétera, de América Latina. Pero por otro lado, yo diría que en Chile y en Perú, a diferencia de Argentina, no tienen una fuerte clase media, sino que hay mucha desigualdad. Entonces, la mayoría, los que estaban a favor de la dictadura, pertenecían a una clase alta, clase media alta, blanca y rica, y los que eran en contra eran clase media, media baja y mayoría más morenita, digamos, para ser políticamente correcto. Entonces, hay una mayor desigualdad en la sociedad peruana y chilena que apoyó la dictadura, las dictaduras en ese sentido, y sigue habiendo mayor desigualdad y menos sociedad civil. Yo insisto en la sociedad civil, que la sociedad civil en Argentina es muy fuerte, pero también me tengo que contradecir a mí misma, porque si miramos lo que pasó en la Plaza Dignidad en Chile, desde octubre del año pasado, vemos que hay una nueva generación que está, porque en Chile hubo mucho, primero que la dictadura chilena duró mucho más, del 73 al 91, después el hecho de que, bueno, por la prosperidad económica, después mucha gente que se exilió de Chile, y después ese hecho que, bueno, recién los nietos son los que toman la voz, y eso es lo que le pasó en Chile. En Chile, por ejemplo, la educación es privada, la educación superior era privada hasta hace poco, entonces no todos pudieron acceder a la universidad, y lo que vemos la nueva oleada con la Plaza de Dignidad es un nuevo Chile que ya está, bueno, completamente descontento con ese pacto que se hizo, con la situación que se hizo, con esa desigualdad que se aceptó como algo normal. Yo por eso creo que en Chile las cosas estaban cambiando y esperemos que cambien, pero también vimos la reacción de un gobierno democráticamente electo que estaba sacándole los ojos a sus propios ciudadanos, apuntando a los ojos de los estudiantes, que uno quedó ciego, Gustavo Gatica, que perdió la vista en los dos ojos porque les estaban apuntando con las balas de goma a los ojos, después le tiraron ácido, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces yo creo que la sociedad chilena está despertando con la nueva generación, la peruana todavía no, y le falta mucho por recorrer.
Muchísimas gracias, Nikolina. Y Ana, ¿quieres decir algo?
No, quería solo agradecer a Nikolina una vez más y concluir que desgraciadamente no podemos seguir con las preguntas, aunque les hagan muchísimo.
Así es que siempre salen, pero no podemos continuar. Una vez más, te agradezco mucho por tu ponencia y por estas respuestas. Continuamos el año próximo. Soy casi segura que de verdad la próxima vez nos veamos en Serbia y de nuevo vamos a hablar contigo.